Thank you, everybody, for staying. The last two sessions we have in this room today on the medical track will be run by Doug Plata, who's a physician and a frequent speaker at the Mars Society. He needs no further introduction, except I think he will say a little more about himself for those who you've not met him.
Yeah, so again, my name is Doug Plata, and I am an urgent care physician. That's what I do for my pay, but for my passion, can you guess what I might be? I'm a space advocate. So, it's pretty rare that when I speak at conferences such as this, that I actually speak about anything medical, because there's just so much to do with space that medical is one part of it. But I did want to go ahead and address this topic with you. It may be that I'll be ending a little bit early, and I might begin the next one a little bit early, just because I think that's sort of a longer presentation. But my title is Providing for the Medical Needs of a Growing Base. And this would be whether it's on the moon or Mars or elsewhere. But the medical needs of a growing base. So, like they said in speech class, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them, right? So let's. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at what I'll propose would be 4 crew phases in the development of a base towards a settlement. And then from a medical standpoint, what sort of prevention and screening could be done for the people who are going to the base? What about emergency rescue? What medical facilities would be needed at each of the phases? And then what about the physician and other healthcare providers? How could that be provided so that when they're needed, they're available? And finally, sort of brief mention about medications. So let me propose that that going from an initial crew to a permanent base on the moon or Mars, that it could and should follow the following phases. I think that it should start with an initial team, a very historic group of people that land on Mars, a relatively small group of people that go to stay for an extended period of time because they're shielded, because they got a centrifuge indoors, and they have all the supplies that they need. And every time you rotate crew, you risk their lives. So we lost 14 people in the shuttle program in the process of rotating. So if we can extend crew stay, but for Mars, how do you do that? What you could do is you could follow biomedical criteria. They could be checked and to see, for example, bone mineral density. Is it going to get too low before you were to do an Earth return window? You take advantage of that. If it looks like things are going well, keep them for another period of time, and then check them again, and keep extending their stay based on biomedical criteria. But the initial crew is going to have their medical needs, and how would they be met? And then I think after this commercial initial crew establishes the basic infrastructure, making sure the habitats are operating well, there's propellant production, there's water and organics. More habitats allow international astronauts to go ahead and explore, and they are going to be like Top Gun, right stuff sort of astronauts. They'll have some health needs, medical needs. But then after you increase the flight rate, especially if we have the BFR, then the initial private settlers, people who pay to go, will start arriving. And my suggestion is that phase should be broken up into 2 parts. One, in which these people are checked out and made sure that they don't really have any sort of dramatic medical conditions that might require significant care which we're not prepared to treat. But then later, private settlers could come in just whatever health that they have, in which case you better have quite a bit of medical care capability for these people, So what about the prevention and screening? So I would suggest that the initial crew as well as the international Mars exploration astronauts are going to be like just in peak of health. These people are fairly young, peak of health. They've been screened by the aerospace medicine people, and they don't have any cardiac problems. So I think that for them, the screening is basically the screening that we have now for astronauts. Very high criteria. If you have an arrhythmia, sorry, you're not going to Mars, sort of thing. Okay, now the initial private settlers, what I would say is these people, there's not a lot of medical facilities and services and medications available, so the screening would be pretty high, but since these people are private settlers, they'll probably tend to be older because those people, you have to live long enough to save up money to pay Elon his $200,000, right? Not every 20, 30-year-old has $200,000 in the bank, but 50, 60-year-olds do, But these initial people, they need to be screened to make sure that when they land, they're not going to be a medical burden to the base, especially in a way that the base is not prepared to provide. And then later private settlers, well, I think it's a pretty low criteria. It is, you need to be able to survive the trip there, but when you get there, there's medical facilities available because the base has grown really towards a settlement, and there's more facilities and services there. So let me just sort of briefly mention about emergency rescue. This is the idea of when, especially international astronauts exploring different parts of Mars, if there's a crash or there's some sort of problem and there's a medical emergency, I think there needs to be preparation of sending an ambulance in the form of a refueled lander that does a suborbital shot, and 20 minutes later there is a strike team that's your sort of ambulance sort of people who are ready to be able to provide emergency medical care, and that ambulance rocket is sort of constantly ready to go. I think that it's just something that we ought to really plan on, because you wouldn't want to find yourself in a medical situation and you hadn't planned for that. That would just be a disaster. Now, emergency return, meaning returning people to Earth because something happened and you don't have the medical care available on Mars. I got to say, I don't see too many scenarios where you're going to be shipping people back. You have to wait for the Earth return window to open. You got 6, or I don't know, if you're BFR, you got 3 months back. That's you can't do that. You got to be able to provide those services on site. The moon is a different situation. That's a 3-day back to Earth. The Earth return window is open all the time. So there is actually an advantage, I think relatively small advantage to the moon in this situation. Okay, what about medical facilities? Again, the different phases. The initial crew, as I'm seeing it, there's sort of a part of the habitat that is the place where procedures can be done. There's sort of a crash cart there. You got your defibrillator or whatever. You've got your emergency medicines. It's sort of the location of the habitat, and that's your medical facilities. For international astronauts, in my scenario, the international astronauts are arriving. Their governments are paying the early expensive tickets because governments can afford that sort of money. And the selection of the international, there'll probably be some collaboration between the countries as to what sort of medical providers is the growing base needing. And I think you could have highly trained healthcare providers as in plan in part, and that's really going to go ahead and help. In terms of the facilities, I could imagine a medical habitat, something that you possibly could do a surgery, like an appendectomy at. Now, for the initial private settlers, what about the facilities? These are older people. You may want to actually begin to have some hospital beds, maybe a basic ICU sort of situation, but probably not a full hospital. But the later private settlers, we're talking the numbers are getting into the hundreds to thousands of people. In this situation, I think you basically need the full medical care. You're going to need some clinics. You're going to need some emergency room. You're basically going to need everything. And let me just mention nursing homes, okay? So when I talk about retirement is the business plan, I did that presentation last year. Sometimes people say, oh, you're talking about a nursing home, starting a nursing home on the moon or Mars. No, I don't think this is going to happen. Okay, I don't think we're going to have people in walkers heading to the BFR. Okay, no doctor is going to clear this lady for that, and she should have gone earlier. She's not going to get a ticket. Okay, however, when you have older people moving to a Mars settlement, they are going to grow old, and you are going to need a nursing home. So there is going to be a nursing home on Mars. I don't know if you guys have ever thought about it, but it's inevitable, right? It's just part of settlement, you know. And so you're gonna need the healthcare providers that will, you know, the nursing staff and whatnot to do this. Now, in terms of the medical providers for the initial crew, as I see it, one of the peoples is a fairly sort of broadly emergency medicine trained physician, and I would say there needs to be some cross training, because what if the physician goes down? Okay, so somebody else, I sort of appoint the biologist, but who knows? With the international astronauts, amongst them, I think would be a growing group of your key specialists that you've identified that you statistically probably are going to need in that scenario, and then also preparing for the private settlers. Okay, for the initial private settlers, this is really cool. Oh, you are a cardiologist, you're rich, you want to go to Mars, guess what? You are at the front of the line, because we need somebody, we're going to need somebody like you, okay? Do you think that you could get people who want to, you know, they've saved money, that now they want to play this historic role of being part of Plymouth Rock on Mars? Do you think that you could find people who are different specialists who would like to continue to work, continue to serve their fellow settlers there in this growing settlement? I think so. I think there are plenty of healthcare providers that would not only feel honored, but just feel almost, you know, a great desire to continue to play that role in this emerging community. And then you can also have, mind you, there's a 14-minute time delay on average, but telemedicine. You can pretty much consult with any specialist through telemedicine. They can't do procedures. That's got to be factored into the plan. Somebody on site who has experience doing the procedures, but consultation, you can have a tremendous amount of that. And then later private settlers, well, I think you need a whole set of specialists. You need everything represented. Surgeries, I think, you know, it's sort of just a growing sort of gradient of capabilities in terms of surgeries. Eventually you're going to need like neurosurgeons in a neurosurgery habitat there as well. Let's not forget dentistry, right? The initial crew, you got two people who can pull teeth on each other, right? Maybe not do crowns and restorations and things like that, but at least they know how to numb up and pull the teeth, right? For the later phases, I think you have different dentists of different types that really can eventually provide the full service. In screening, I think that part of the screening is to get some dental x-rays and make sure you're not going to have an abscess on the way to Mars. Not recommended. And then the allied health fields, everything from, you know, nursing and therapy and x-ray techs, things like that, that needs to be part of the plan too. Developing this capability and having it available at the different phases. For medications, what I would say is the initial crew, these people are very healthy, but I think emergency medicines would be in order. And let me just say, it may be that living in the environment of reduced gravity and maybe increased CO2 within the habitat, things like this, it may be that we might find ourselves with sort of unique medical conditions, almost like new diagnosis being made in that this is the Mars hypoxia syndrome or something like that, you know. And so you sort of have to be ready for things that you don't even anticipate. I'm sure how you do that, but probably should think about it. Yeah. And then the international astronauts, I think again, they're very healthy people. I think it's sort of emergency medicines first and foremost. And then the private settlers, boy, you're probably going to need to have a supply of antihypertensives. Remember, it's going to take you time to ship it there, right? So you need to anticipate what people might need and then have it on stock, even if it's going to go bad because nobody actually needed it. And then the later private settlers who come with all of their wonderful diseases, you better have a full pharmacy, right? So I guess what I'm saying is nobody of you have, I don't know, have you guys been in a lecture in which this whole process has been discussed?
No, but you forgot one aspect, which we were talking about in the last lecture, which is pregnancy.
Yes, sort of getting there. Let me think about that. I think...
We talk about defects, mutations, gestational problems. Should they even get pregnant? They want to sterilize people before they go until they get...
Yeah. Any volunteers? No, I think the initial crew, if they're living off Earth for extended period of times, I mean, it wouldn't take too long to go beyond the 1 year that we've had on the ISS or the 1 year, 3 months that they had on the Mir. And you go much longer than that, and you're in a situation where it's like military deployment. If somebody's away long enough, you either rotate them or you send the family to the base, okay?
The problem is we don't know what's going to happen with a woman who gets pregnant in the low gravity.
I know. So my belief is that this initial crew should have their families with them, but they shouldn't have dependent children back on Earth because you're separating families, okay? So you take your spouse with you, and the guys, you get vasectomy because it's reversible. So there's all these things we have to consider. But I thought I had the picture in here, but I can't seem to find it. But you know, you're going to have with the private settlers, you're eventually going to have like younger people, and you're going to have pregnancies and things like this. But from very early, we need to do the artificial gravity experiments on animals. I think we shouldn't wait and do it in Leo. I think we should go to the moon, and we should start doing it there because that is the final environment. The force vectors, there's physics involved. And so I think the initial crew, one of the things they should do is go through a series of animal models as quickly as possible to find out the artificial gravity prescription for healthy gestation and childhood. And they themselves are motivated to try to get through as fast as they can because if you can have a macaw monkey who's gestated in reduced gravity and then is born and you're following it, at some point it becomes, I think, the decision of those parents as to whether they want to reverse their vasectomy and attempt, based on their own ethical judgment, as to whether they should attempt that. But they've got a higher order primate that's several years older, and you keep watching that primate, and if anything goes wrong, you immediately ship the human kid back. There's a hand?
Well, so I guess I was just curious then, so in this plan, I assume there would be, gynecologists or maternal fetal medicine specialists sent up as well, some sort of maternity ward?
Yeah, as the population is starting to have those people, then you need to have the specialists already. You need to have the incubators. You need to have everything. You need to be prepared. But I think what I'm saying is there needs to be a medical plan, and you need to have a huge strategy in preparation for it. Let me mention this: producing medicines. Medicines are actually pretty low mass. You can have a year's supply in your hand if you're taking it once a day. So I don't know that the shipping cost of medications is all that great. But I do believe eventually we would be going ahead and producing medicines off Earth. And that is something that a PharmD, a doctor of pharmacology, somebody needs to do that work of trying to figure out what would the steps be. Any idea what this plant is?
Is that foxglove?
Foxglove, yeah. Produces what?
Digitalis
Yeah, or digoxin is the brand name. So there are certain things that could be done. There's be a lot of chemistry and making aminopenicillins and things like this. So that is my presentation. Thank you for your attention. I know there's some more questions. Let's go with you.